Hello, internet and the world. I am not M squared. I don't know why I keep thinking doing that, but anyway, it's a running gag. I don't know. Again, I'm trying to figure out how to do the intro of all of these videos, but I'm gonna dive in a little bit about basically my tech history, kind of like an anthology, if you will, of where I've come from, because apparently I can't seem to break into the tech industry per se. So I figured instead of putting it down on paper and writing it down for whatever, like for a resume or whatever, why not just do it the way I normally know how to do it and put it in video format? So, why not? Here we go. So, my tech story starts when I was about 2 years old. It was the first time that I had realistically ever had any interaction with a computer of any kind. My my mom at the time was living with her parents, and so the story goes, at least that's what she's always told me, was that there was one night where my mom and my grandmother both had to work the next day, and my grandfather, being already freshly retired, and does not want to do any work other than just playing with cars and stuff. So, but basically, there was one night that I did not want to sleep. Now, one of two things could have happened. One, my mom could have just went and slept on the couch, which she didn't do. Or two, hand the responsibility over to somebody who actually was responsible and was able to take care of another human. So, she chose the second option. So, my grandfather and I basically bonded over me being obsessed and enamored with the pointer, with the cursor on the screen, and again, this was 95, 96, so things weren't very advanced. We're talking about like Windows 3, so that was like my first sort of like introduction, if you will, into tech. And I think it basically still, obviously, I mean, using phone and the microphone, and you got all kinds of tech around me. Like, it's something that I thoroughly enjoy a lot and have grown up around, and something that I've realized for a very long time, that it was essentially a path that I wanted to take at some point in time. And as I got older, I understood more about how things actually worked and why things work the way they do and how things work. My God. But basically, my mom was not a fan of it. She did not like it. She didn't care for it. To be honest, she grew up using an electric typewriter. That was pretty much it. That was the advanced of her time. And so with me being so enlightened and enamored by the interface, the GUI, and just the fact that computers were something that I could speak the language of, it very much noticed that her and I started to become a disconnect. And quite honestly, the only thing that we were able to pretty much bond over was video games. And that was it. Like, so we would play things like Mario Kart a lot of times, and I would get frustrated. We would play board games, we'd play card games, we would do things, but it wasn't until my grandfather and I had this parallel with technology. And for him being a car person, it realistically allowed him to understand things very much so, in the sense that it was realistically a way to bond with somebody. It was like a car. If you could get under the hood with somebody about talking specs, or what they call talking shop, you were in and you were a part of the community. Well, technology has not been that way, and it's very much a very complicated type of environment, and a very fast, rapid paced environment, because you have to know either you're on the bleeding edge of things, or you're like 10 years behind. There is no metaphorical sweet spot anymore. There is no, oh, well, you want a mid-range, computer. It might be able to do what you need it to do, or it might not. There's like a 50-50 chance, because of the way the software is written now. There is a very small chance that you can't be able to run certain programs anymore. And so with that, you have to meet a certain threshold. That's why, Windows has what they call system requirements now. And they've always had this, but a lot of people have always ignored it, because they always was just like, well, I'm going to build a decent system with like 1 or 2 gigs of memory and a 512 gig hard drive. Like, what's the problem? So at that point in the early 2000s, that was pretty high end, and then as years went on, that became the low end. That was the minimum that you could run a particular OS, which, again, very bizarre, but at the same time, you have smartphones now that pretty much do that. They are able to hit that minimum threshold now, which is crazy to say. Like, what? The iPhone is almost 20 years old now, which is crazy to say out loud. And the iPad is going to be, what, also 20 in 2030? Like, I mean, these things are just, these pieces of tech is so crazy, because think about it. The hard drive has been around for a long time. I remember when I was a kid growing up, they were celebrating, I think it was 50 years. The hard drive has been around for 50 years, and that was in 2009. Like, there are pieces of technology that a lot of people don't realize that we use today and to this day that has been around for eons, it seems like. But it has been around since the Industrial Revolution. Like we had the printing press, and then the printing press turned into, you know, other things, and it kind of evolved over time. Like we still print, we still do print certain things like books and magazines and other things. But the evolution, the process that it takes to get to those steps and to get through has been all digitized, as opposed to doing it the old analog way of doing the actual manual printing. And so it computers have come a long way, is basically what I'm trying to boil it down to. So I've used pretty much everything from the early mid 90s all the way to now. I mean, 30 some years. So I've used pretty much everything. I've switched, I've pivoted. My mind, the way that it works, is that it has to have certain, how do I phrase this? There are certain things that some people are used to using. Like everybody buys an iPhone just because everybody has an iPhone. They don't think about, oh, well, why if I try a different phone? Like, what if I tried a Samsung phone? What if I tried a Moto? What if I tried God forbid, an LG phone? Uh, I was one of those people that had an LG G4, and it had a leather back on it, and you could remove it, which it was an amazing phone. It was a great budget option for the price point that I got it, and it was great. It was actually one of the first Android phones that I ever had, and it was great. It was awesome. I hated the LG skin that they put on Android at that time, but it wasn't bad. So, but I've used operating systems and systems as a whole for years. I've learned from the basics of the GUI all the way now to the back end and the backbone. Like you know, I can punch in some command scripts and be able to, update my system from the command line instead of using the GUI like I'm used to. And, a lot of people don't, they can't say that they know how to do that successfully without breaking their system. And so from there, I've used various versions of Windows, of course, because we were a Windows household for whatever. Only because schools, I would assume, might be the leading factor of that, but yeah. So I've used Windows most of my life, with some side questing of, using at the time, what was it? System 7, System 8, I think it was, on the original Macintosh from the 80s. Yeah, a friend of mine had a old school Macintosh, and he would play, I don't know, fucking, I don't even remember what kind of games he had on it, but he played on it, had fun with it, whatever, I don't know. and then later on, I ended up being in, let's see, what was this? 2005? No, 2003. And one of the schools I was in, because I bounced around a lot to different schools and school corporations and all that stuff, but one school that I remember going to, they had a all Mac computer lab, which I thought was amazing. It was great. So Um, it was either System 9 or it was Mac OS 10 real early on. And we used a art studio program called KidPix. And if you don't know what KidPix is and you're not from the millennial generation, you you might have ran into KidPix at some point. Um, KidPix again was Mac's equivalent of a kid's version of, say, Photoshop or Microsoft Paint or something to that extent. It was a very big art program. Kids could dink around and play and use spray can and stuff and stamps and stuff. It was cool. Um, but I was still enamored by the user interface because I hadn't at that point understood that, things like DOS existed. Because my grandfather came from the DOS world. He had different the keyboard computers from his time. So he knew the protocols and the calls and, all kinds of things to start and stop computers from running certain software stacks. And basically he was the one that knew a lot of different programming languages, because if you didn't know any programming languages, you couldn't run any of the computers. And the other thing too was that he understood a lot about the, he was able to solder things, which kind of sad that I haven't watched a tutorial yet on how to solder, or at least how to solder properly, because there is a good and a bad way to do it. Because if you solder something to the wrong, trace, you're pretty much going to fry your main board or the logic board. So that's fun. uh, so, but so he, in his older, as he was an adult, he was around when the Commodore 64 came out, the Amstrad came out. He also owned something called the Radio Shack color computer, which a lot of people my generation have no clue about what that is. So before, computers, especially console computers, only ran in green and black, and it was basic colors because you couldn't run a normal color array because the television screens at that time couldn't output color. So Radio Shack, in conjunction with this computer company called Tandy, created a color array type of console computer. And it was built around the 70s, I want to say. And it didn't last very long. But Radio Shack banked on trying to expand because obviously they're electronics store, so they want to, help with that sort of thing. And so having that sort of back end where you can go and you can buy, the new, the new memory chips if you wanted to upgrade your memory, or if you wanted to change, certain things in the actual console, you could do it. Now there were some that were, like Amstrad and Commodore, that really was like try at your own risk type of situation. So it was kind of a hit and miss with certain computer makers, or as we call them now, system integrators. So because back then there wasn't very many. There was Commodore, IBM, HP, um, Toshiba. Toshiba was kind of relatively new, but they got into the market. Um, you had Tandy and you had Amstrad. But, like, a lot of the computer makers ended up phasing out because they were losing money, as well as Compaq. I forgot about them, yeah. But a lot of the system integrators, they did evolve. They did go through, they got through the Y2K. They got through the dot-com bubble. They came through. Not unscathed, though. I mean, they had their own woes and problems and stuff and whatnot. So, but it became more of an issue later on where certain companies had come up, like Dell, or as we like to call them now because they own them, Delalienware, and like IBM doesn't make, consumer grade electronics anymore, so they sold that over to Lenovo. Lenovo is still the biggest, if not the king of enterprise hardware. I mean, they still have the touch nub in the middle of the keyboard that you can still use for. Hey, I guess I never thought about that. The track nub is kind of like a precise. I guess you could use it for a lot of different things. I guess I don't know. But yeah, so his day, you had what they called disk operating systems. Okay, DOS. So you had Apple DOS, which is not even close to what Darwin is today. And then you had MS-DOS, which is completely different to what Windows Core is right now. And then you have Linux. And you also have Unix, which Unix is what actually started all of this. So Unix is a subsystem all into itself that has created everything we run today. Okay? And it has been since the dawn of time, or at least since man has been able to figure out how to program a machine through key punch cards. A lot of people don't realize, like, programmers used to use what they called key punch cards. And if that key punch card was out of organization or out of, say their cards went everywhere, and the program would never run. It would come up with errors and it would spit out logic loops, or that's where we get a lot of the errors that we see today, because people don't run clean software or they don't run clean code, and so it's over bloated and it's very much a mess. So when you get errors, especially system value errors or memory leak errors or anything like that, you're pretty much SOL with running that particular piece of software. Or if it's the OS, you're just going to have to trash it and start over. But so basically that's where my background comes from. Where I come in is when everybody was phasing out of DOS, their DOS systems, and basically just going to a new, more modern system. Because if I remember correctly, Windows 3.11 was the last 8-bit system. It was kind of like an 8 or 16-bit operating system. And so because it ran MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS, and obviously Apple DOS is Apple DOS. So, which you don't really get Darwin until later, which again, bizarre. But I think that's only because after Steve Jobs came back is when they started implementing Darwin, because Apple DOS ran almost as equally as long. I think it was up until System 9, if I'm not mistaken. So, and a lot of tech enthusiasts will definitely be hating in comments of this one, because they're gonna just be like, wait a minute. You didn't say that the line code is you have to use sudo. It's like, it's okay. This is a very rough and dirty version of where I came from. Doesn't matter. Everybody has their opinions. It's okay. So it wasn't until later on, until about, I want to say 98, because I used Windows 95, just kind of like a little play around, play games type of thing. I was playing educational games at this point in time in my life, so I really didn't have, much much in the way. I mean, I had SimCity, I had Sims, I had a bunch of like Maxis games, which was kind of cool. Shout out to anyone who knows what Streets of SimCity is. That's a fun game. Very bizarre, but very fun game. And then I was also playing a bunch of E-games. And E-games was kind of like this weird anomaly that happened in like the 90s and early 2000s. It was basically a compilation disc of a bunch of like indie devs, which I found out much later. I didn't even know what E-games was. And so E-games, hence the name, electronic games, basically was kind of like Wild Tangent, if you remember that hellscape that we lived through in the 2000s, but it was much cleaner. And Wild Tangent Games was something of, it was kind of like Real Player. It was installed or tacked on to everything you bought, especially back in the day. It was horrible. And it would always be flagged in antivirus software and anti-malware software as having, Trojans or adware or anything. And it was horrible. It was a horrible way to like launch games and stuff. It was bad. This was like before Steam. So think about this. If Valve had Steam with ads and trial games instead of the actual games, not very many people would be playing on Steam. So basically I'm playing on, Windows 95, and I'm playing on Windows 98. Well, something happens one day, and I go in, I'm determined to play a game on my computer because I just got done playing Mario Kart for the 50 billionth time, and I'm burned out by playing Pokemon on my Game Boy, and I'm just like, I want to play a computer game. And so I go into my grandfather's room, which was coined the computer room, and basically, he's sitting there hacking away at my computer because apparently, and I didn't know this, he tried to do an update, and again, we had dial-up at this point, so dial-up was a nightmare too. But we had dial-up at that time, and he tried to update my computer. Well, something didn't go right with the update and corrupted the drive. So he spent all night that night trying to recover everything so that when I got up and was going to go to, play on my computer, I wouldn't notice. So I round the corner and he's sitting here on a black screen and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, what's going on? What'd you do? What happened? And he's like, nothing happened. Just leave me alone. Just go and do something else. I did not understand at that point in time that he actually was trying to debug through DOS and trying to figure out what folder and what file had been corrupted so he could then take and remove it so he could then boot back into Windows, which at this point Windows was just a graphical user interface, which is why I keep saying GUI all the time. It's a long word. I'm not gonna so what your phone uses, Android, iPhone, iOS, all it is a graphical layer, and underneath, which we don't see as an end user, we don't see, is the streams and streams of code that gets re-updated every second, because it's a lot. And that's why, especially nowadays, we have multi-core, multi-threaded processors that can, handle a lot of this, and why we need more memory and why we need more storage. It's because the GUI, it's not necessarily the actual back end layer, what they call the kernel layer, but the kernel has something to do with it as well. If the kernel is bloated and has legacy code in it that no one has ever thought to remove, and the GUI also is bloated and whatnot, you get what we have with Windows 11 and has 50 gigs of storage, 30 to 50 gigs of storage that it needs, because Microsoft's too lazy and cheap to actually hire programmers that actually will remove the genuine old code, the old legacy code, because a lot of these places in the enterprise use a lot of their dependency on older code, which then essentially screws over the rest of the consumer base, because it's the enterprise that is screwing it over, which Microsoft, why are you so annoying with things like everything? Like, why are you so annoying? If Microsoft wasn't so arrogant about everything and could actually take a page out of a number of anybody's, okay, whether it be Apple, whether it be IBM, whether it be anybody, take a page from somebody and actually utilize it to your advantage. Not, oh, well, we're going to try and copy your homework and then just blatantly write it off as, well, this didn't work. It's like, do what works, all right? If it means rewriting the whole program, rewrite the whole freaking system. It doesn't matter. So it it boils my brain because Microsoft has been on this tear since Windows 8 because to they refuse to update their code. They just do. And so that's why I personally have used Windows up until Windows 7. And yes, I've used Windows Vista and survived, and I enjoyed it. It was great. A lot of the libraries and stuff didn't really affect me much. I mean, yeah, the drivers sucked because it was slapped together at the last second, but it doesn't matter. It didn't affect me. It's kind of like the bizarre anomaly that a lot of people had when people were running into graphical glitches with Cyberpunk during COVID. I did not have those issues. I don't know where the general populace gets a lot of their hardware from or a lot of their test stuff from. It is very sad, to say the least. But again, Windows 7, in my opinion, was the last good operating system, period. And I've used Windows, don't get me wrong, I've used Windows periodically just to kind of gauge, test, see where they're at. I was also, which again, I've not been one for a while, so I don't really care if it is or not still a thing or not. But I was an insider. I was one of the very many Windows insiders back in the day, early on when they decided to try this out, about when they came out with Windows 8. Windows 8 was horrible from the start. Driver instability, had a very bad update cycle because the way that the code would work is basically you'd be in the middle of something, and normally it would have a window that says, hey, save your work, save your progress, whatever you were doing, the system needs to restart for an update. None of that. None of that happened. I was in the middle of watching something, and it was a tutorial too. I cannot remember what this video was, but I do remember I was watching a video on YouTube. It was a tutorial. And in the middle of it, my computer automatically, without my permission, need I remind you, without my permission, restarted. And the audio drivers crapped out because of it. And at this point, I used Realtek for audio drivers. Realtek did not have proper audio drivers for Windows 8 at this point yet. So that was fun. That was interesting. So it wasn't until, so kind of backtrack. So because I was so enamored with GUI and graphics and user interface and user experience and everything, I had used Apple for a little while with their whole system OS, and then also later on Mac OS, and its variations and its flavors. And don't get me wrong, Darwin is 10 million times better than the slow, clanky, always broke down, like, I'm not joking, like the what we considered the Jelly Bean Macs of the early 2000s, they ran system 8 or 9 or something. They'd constantly be crashing. They would constantly crash. They would freeze up. They would have kernel panics. It was horrible. And so when they rewrote and scripted the code for Mac OS, when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, Mac OS was completely better. And don't get me wrong, you had the arrow and the floating glass and all that stuff. It was great. For whatever reason, though, the development team and the various of other people that was running the OS division at the time, similar to Microsoft, didn't quite understand that you had to get rid of, and you still do to this day, you have to figure out a way to compress the old legacy code enough through, whether it be compatibility layers, whether it be through a translation layer, whatever, to get the OS to run stable enough and long enough so that people aren't freaking out. Now, Android has had this issue too, but years ago. They've gotten better with the way that they've developed, Android, the kernel, as opposed to Android, what we know now. Again, Android is just a kernel that Google has just smeared their branding all over. And it basically works like Apple. And it's very much so a very pain in the butt and a very big eyesore. Now, you might have one question. You might be wondering, well, why are you so meticulous about compilers and a bunch of other things and the programming language and everything else? It's because if there is a system uptime counter in a lot of OSs, especially nowadays, and if that timer gets disrupted for any reason whatsoever, that timer gets reset. And so if your system's uptime constantly needs to be rebooted, that means the system is not stable. And basically the other reason why I'm so hard and very vocal about operating systems as a whole is because of a couple of things. Now, you could pick 10 people out of a crowd of 50, and none of them would want to know what I'm about to tell you. UI and UX is the single most important thing, yes. However, it's not the only thing. So if you have a UI and UX development team only focusing on aesthetics and visual appeal and spacing on type fonts and typefaces and whether or not certain icons are too close together and all that stuff, you're going to lose your consumer base. You're going to lose a very large amount of people that use your operating system. Then you have the other side, which is the actual programmers, the coders, the visual, the ones that keep the back end from imploding. And that's the core team. The core team needs to understand that in order for, the system to have click events, or, if a system needs an if-then statement, or if, say, you activate a click event and it opens up the wrong program. That's a big problem. And a lot of people will notice that very quickly. Say they open up Firefox and they end up getting into Control Panel instead, or their settings, or whatever. That is a very bad and poor rendition of a programmer and a software developer. And then you have a third option, which is software compatibility. Nowadays, this is more in tune because we're so overwhelmed with options. We're so overwhelmed with legacy software wanting to work on modern hardware, which, again, is a big problem. Somebody running 20 or 30 or 40-year hardware and they expect Windows 11 to run on it, it's not going to work. Like, get rid of your 8088s and Pentium 2s and Pentium 3s and get something more modern. Like, there's no reason you shouldn't. But the one big thing is all about user experience. User experience is definitely the single most appealing thing that's going to get people to use your operating system and be able to use your operating system for the long haul. If there's something that they want to tweak or customize or personalize for their own thing, that's their thing. That's what they want. They don't want to, have, certain things, or, want to. I thought I could do this without disrupting the camera feed. Without going through hurdles and changes and things. And it's so bizarre that every operating system now does this completely differently. Unix, and what I mean by Unix, I'm talking about Linux. So Unix-based systems, more specifically Linux, has the most robust user experience and user interface that you can find anywhere. Like, I mean, this puts Mac OS to shame, this puts iOS and iPad OS to shame, this puts TV OS to shame, this puts, like, and again, I'm only not including Windows in this because Microsoft refuses to actually allow customization still. After 2 to 3 software revisions, they have killed customization, and they really have, and it's not coming back anytime soon, like, at all. It's like, yay, you get to turn your light theme into a dark theme, or you can have dark mode and this and that. It's like, what kind of customization is that? You used to be able to pin your taskbar on different parts of the screen. You could change your wallpaper without anything. You could go and find themes. You could change the text. You could change the text, the font, whatever you want to call it. You could change all of that from the cursor to the hourglass or the beach ball to whatever you wanted. Why is that something that's not good anymore? You know what I mean? Like, it's very bizarre how things have kind of gone backwards in a way, where we have ideas, we have these sort of concepts in our head of, the perfect desktop environment that we want. And that's all they are is, Windows, Mac OS, iPad OS, iOS, tvOS, heck, even Roku. Roku's little proprietary OS. It's all skins. They're all just desktop environments. They're not anything to write home about. They give you a GUI to do the work that you need to do. Well, if you can't do that work specifically, then what's the point of having a user interface in the first place? So, to make a long story short, let me go back. So 2006, okay, 2005, 2006, my grandfather shows me that, hey, I got this in the mail finally. And I'm like, what? Because he's always looking online, finding random crap online. And I'm like, okay, what random deal did you get from like Newegg or something? And he's like, no, I actually bought this from the website. I'm like, what website? So he shows me is a disk of Ubuntu. And this is the first time that I have ever heard of this or have seen it, because he bought he bought this, and he bought 2, I think, copies of Windows Vista, but in like release candidate form. So it was like the pre-release versions of Windows Vista. So I could like try it out, see how I like it, blah, 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 this and that and the other. But this was where things kind of turned inward for me, because I decided to, realistically, I thought that, maybe Windows was kind of like a jumping off point for me. So I go ahead, I try this very, very early Ubuntu version, and it asks for a password. I'm like, okay, what should I do? How do I do this? And so I just typed in a random password, not thinking, like before, in Windows, was it 95 or 98, that I had locked myself out of my computer because I didn't write it down, because I thought I would be able to remember it. So I got a phone call later on from my grandmother, and she wanted to print something out, and her computer wasn't connected to the printer, and mine was. And so I was staying with my mom and stepdad at the time, and so she calls. She's like, hey, so got a question for you. I was like, okay, what? And she's like, you know how to get into your computer? I'm like, why? What do you mean? And she's like, well, I was trying to print something out and needed some help and stuff. I was like, oh. And so it dawned on me that my computer not only was password, it had a password on it, but it was running a foreign operating system that even she didn't understand how to use it. So it was like my grandfather had this disk of an operating system that nobody knew how to run, at least at the time. And so basically what I did at that point was I was like, okay, so I kind of tried to like explain to her what had happened, and I'm like, oh crap, I thought I wrote it down, and I genuinely did. I thought I did. And apparently I didn't write it down either. So basically I ended up having to wipe that drive because I didn't have anything on it, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. I was just kind of toying around with it. But it was my first instance of using Linux, so it was kind of cool. And then later on, um, I I end up starting to get into, uh, obviously you go through Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, that sort of thing. And then after I had gotten through the insider build of Windows 8, because at this point, I had two computers. I had my main one, and then I had a backup. My main one, now the only reason I had this, because my grandfather had freaking 8 computers. Okay. So this was how the network was, the local makeshift network. He had 8 computers, 8 desktop computers, and like 2 or 3 laptops. So he had a total of 10 computers at one time. It was nuts. And between me and him, we were basically more or less just constant updaters because of dial-up. So basically, whenever he had the master copy of the update folder ready, he would burn it to a CD. And then as time went on, the CD got bigger and the folder got bigger, and so he ended up having to put it up on a DVD. So, guess who had to do the lackey work and the job of updating 8 computers all at once? Me. I basically enjoyed doing it. I ran, and I do. I still remember the process of how I ended up updating everything, and it was hard. And again, I was a teenager at this time, because it's like, I mean, I'm not earning any money from it, but I'm earning experience from it. And so basically, I had I would start with the OS. So I would update Windows first. I would make sure that was done, and then I would go through on the disk to see if there was any drivers on it that needed updated. So either Intel or AMD, because a lot of them were either pre-built, so they had Intel, and then a lot of the stuff that we had built was all AMD. So it was either Athlon or what have you. So basically what we would do is we would kind of tag team. He would do certain ones, and then I would do certain ones, or if he didn't feel like doing it, I would do all of them. So it was a masterstroke of genius of how we were able to update 10 computers without internet. Well, without internet, with dial-up internet. He would spend weeks at a time downloading, and then the downloads would fail, and re-download things like antivirus programs, anti-malware programs, anti-spyware programs, adware blockers, like all kinds of stuff, because of the way that things were back then. And it was so much of an experience, and it was a great experience. And so I ended up getting gifted my senior year of high school. I ended up getting gifted an upgrade. I ended up getting somewhat better hardware throughout the year, but I ended up getting a full-fledged upgrade. And at this point, Ryzen hadn't come out yet. It was rumored to have been, speculated to be coming out soon and whatnot. So, but around 2010 to 2011, my grandfather was like, "Hey, so this is your graduation gift." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. I'm fine with that." And so, like, it was something of, and I still have, so when crap went sideways, that particular chip, the, what was it, it was an A series. It was like I think it was an APU that that AMD had built at that point. It was one of the early APUs that he had gotten for me. And to be honest, it ran crazy. Now, grant you, I did have a graphics card on the side, not a discrete, but like a separate graphics card in conjunction with the onboard graphics, because on the onboard graphics at the time was kind of Intel actually was able to figure out the graphics part of things because they were putting chips together, and that's another thing. Chip manufacturing has been insane ever since. But I was able to run games that I didn't even think I would be able to run on my system at the time. Games like Thief. There was a Thief remake that had come out. Dishonored ran flawlessly on my computer at the time. Far Cry 3 ran great on it. The Saints Row series ran great on it. Just all kinds of these like high-end, heavy 3D games could run on this APU, and I was just blown away by it. I was like, okay, well, let's see what else we can throw at this thing and see how it works. Because that was the thing. I was kind of like the weird, bizarre, like mad scientist, if you will, of the whole operation, I guess. Because like I would push things so hard and so far until they would either just completely crash. That's why I always, every time I see like a kernel panic or blue screen, I'm like, yes, I've finally. But then it like flashes nowadays, and it's just like, I didn't see what it said. Wait, hold up. And so like, so the joy of pushing tech has always been there, and it will always be there. I always love tinkering. I always love just pushing lower end hardware to see where that threshold is. Now, grant you, obviously, like for legal reasons and whatnot, like Intel and AMD, they specify certain things and whatnot. So, yeah. But, so in 2011, I'd gotten gifted a computer. We put Windows on it again. And I keep hearing Windows 8. Windows 8, Windows 8, Windows 8. Talks about Windows 8 being different and everything and whatnot. I'm like, okay, we'll try it, see what happens. So I dig on the Microsoft site, try and find it, try and see if I can get somehow into being able to try it out. Because they always said, they were like, oh, you can try Windows for free now and all this stuff and whatnot. I'm like, all right, cool. And so what ended up happening was I hated Windows 8, and I really didn't like Windows 10 because Windows 10 was even worse. Even though nowadays Windows 10 is pretty much the only good operating system left, they worked a crap ton through a lot of the bugs that, and don't get me wrong, there are more than likely still, even their their EOL lifespan, they still probably have crap ton of things and whatnot and bugs, but it wasn't stable out of the gate. Every Windows revision, removing the betas, the alphas, the pre-alphas, the release candidates, all that stuff, the actual consumer product, the final product that you and I are able to use every day, was always, to some capacity, stable. You could turn it on, you could run it for hours, you could do whatever you wanted with it, and then, every once in a while you would have, like, issues where, the OS would, just throw up because of memory leaks and crap and whatnot. For whatever reason, though, when they changed their code base from the old NT days to what they call now Windows Core, which still doesn't make any friggin' sense, but whatever. It was still in early development at this point, and it really did not handle anything well. It was like strapping a rocket to a pig and launching it off the Hoover Dam and expecting it to live. It wasn't capable at that point in time to handle long, strenuous productivity, activity, gaming, anything. Both Windows 8 and Windows 10. It was just not capable. Windows Core, the core kernel, was not capable of doing anything that extensive yet because it was still early. This is the third revision. Windows 11 is the third revision to this Windows Core project. And as you can tell, it's not doing real hot. You read in the news that more people are switching to Linux than ever before. Me being one of the outliers that switched early, it wasn't because of influence. It wasn't because of the internet. It wasn't because of anything. It was just because of the fact that I saw what a lot of people hadn't seen yet. And I had known for a while that this switch was going to happen regardless, whether Microsoft wanted it or not. They're shooting themselves in the foot, to the point where it's just not going to happen. Microsoft is going to turn into IBM in the long run. We all know it. Like, there's no happy ending for this. There's no happy ending for Microsoft at all in any of this. Microsoft is just going to have to eat itself and basically convert into a commercial-only business model and basically sell off every consumer-grade piece of tech that they own that is outright to somebody else. They're going to have to pull an IBM because they can't keep themselves in business this long, for very long, if they think that they are, it's not going to work very well. Like, look at what they're doing with Xbox. Xbox is virtually imploding on itself because of the way that they don't listen to consumers. Microsoft is killing off Windows with the whole AI thing that's going on. Like, you can't tell me that Microsoft is in this situation where they want to keep control, but they don't know where to put the control at. Okay? The way that old Microsoft ran during Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer was to help other places. That's how they ended up getting Skype, and MSN and a lot of these other places. They wanted to extend help, take over control little by little, and then extinguish. Basically sunset the projects. This is how Microsoft lived for so long. Microsoft bought Hotmail. Microsoft bought like all these other internet trinkets, which basically created their success. Skype was not theirs. Skype was actually something that two people created as a little project to communicate back and forth to each other. It was like the virtual version of the telephone at the time. And we had things like Google Talk. We had, obviously MSN Messenger, but couldn't really call people per se. But like, you can't say that Microsoft is still doing this to this day. They've made great strides to try and impact technology for as long as they have. But the problem is now they have lived long enough to see themselves become the villain that they decided to be this whole time. Because back in the 80s, Bill Gates decided to put Internet Explorer on every computer and lock it down. Now, the only reason that Apple didn't get in trouble for this as well is because Apple used Safari only because they gave the customer the choice. They didn't lock down and be like, well, you only can use Safari. That didn't happen. You could install Netscape, you could install Mozilla, you could install whatever you wanted at the time. And I say Mozilla because it confuses everybody. The Mozilla company and the Mozilla Foundation started with the Mozilla Browser project. That's where we get the Firefox project, because it evolved. So, to kind of break that down. But back in the day, you had Netscape Navigator, you had Safari, you had Internet Explorer, you had the Mozilla project, and you had very, very early on, very early, and I do mean this, very early, was not Opera GX, it wasn't Opera Next, it was just Opera. And it was a very clean, customizable, similar to Mozilla, where with Mozilla you could actually customize things. But it became this running gag that Internet Explorer was where, like, you had to make, like, you had to, if you used Windows, you couldn't run anything else, and that's where a lot of people switched away and went to Mac. That's where the Mac versus PC ads came into play, because the advertising was priceless. You couldn't afford to get people onto the Windows platform because Microsoft was destroying it anyway. And so basically Microsoft ended up getting slammed for that, and they were like, well, you need to give people, the freedom of choice. And Bill Gates was like, okay, sure, but we'll pay you, we'll pay the fine, whatever. Because at that point, Bill Gates was just a friggin' millionaire at that point, and he didn't care. But that's the bizarre part about this, is Microsoft is quite literally taking down everyone else in lieu of what's all going on. Apple and Google obviously have their own infighting of their own modern volition, of course. But Microsoft is gone. Microsoft is just it's what people consider the working man's operating system anymore. And the people who are defending Microsoft, and more importantly Windows 11, as being, well, this is forward-thinking operating system, and, well, you got to understand how to use it. And it's like, I've been using operating systems and using computers as long as some of these tadpoles have been alive. All right. I've again emphasized this in this video. I've used Windows 3.1. I've used Windows 95. I've used Windows 98. I've used Windows Millennium Edition, otherwise known as Windows Me. I've used Windows XP. I've used Windows Vista. I've used Windows 7. And I've used Windows 8. And I've used Windows 10. And I have used Windows 11. Out of those, I would say that Windows Vista was better. Windows ME was better. Windows 95 was better than Windows 11. And I will stand by that forever. People complain that Windows Me was bad. Well, have you tried to use Windows 11 yet? Because it doesn't seem like you have. Like I said, Windows 11 has certain problems where, and again, that's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself, those Windows in a nutshell. But I've used System 7, System 8, System 9, Mac OS 10, Mac OS 11, I think. Apple, your naming and your numbering doesn't make sense. But I've used most of modern Mac OS, as well as a little bit of legacy System OS. I've used iOS. I've used early stages of iPad OS. And now my modern setup is Linux. Now, the Linux environment has been something of kind of a crazy thing lately. I started with Ubuntu, like I said, in 2006. 2011, I ended up going back to Ubuntu because I was like, well, this is what I know. I mean, I'm going to try it again and see what happens. So I used Ubuntu up until a point where an update broke, again, a driver. To the point where basically I was distro hopping at that point. I basically have used pretty much most of the Debian Citrix, so basically the .deb extension of operating systems. And I've now also, modern day, have used Arch. So I've used a lot of RPM stuff. So it depends on what you want, and depends on what you want to kind of deal with, and well, not deal with. Deal with's a bad word. To optimize your system for, because you're not necessarily going to go with the same thing. You know, your cousin could use, Fedora. Well, your school could use something like CentOS. Even though CentOS doesn't exist anymore, they could be using a legacy version to keep it going. As of right now, I am going deeper into this metaphorical digital rabbit hole, because I've experimented with Arch, and I've used Fedora. Like I said, I've used pretty much everything. I'm going to go deeper and try and attempt to use BSD. BSD is a very unique Unix-based system in and of itself, only because BSD is used for a lot of back-end work, a lot of server work, a lot of things that are use case specific. Okay, you're not going to get, you're not going to be able to play games, or at least play games as the normal sense is, on, Linux, or on, Mac OS now, because of the Mac OS, whatever, arcade or whatever the hell it is. I don't know. But yeah, so I'm going to take and try and make an attempt to run BSD. Now, I've tried Haiku very early on, and that was a BIOS successor, which, again, BIOS is okay. It's a very different system, but I feel like it's just like the old days where you could run any flavor of Linux that you want. It's like when there was a billion different like languages out there for like programmers. I feel like it's kind of the same, the base, the same old days, where now it's like the Wild West. It's like you could pick a variant of Linux and you could just run with it for a while, and like, do you like it? Do you not like it? What changes do you want to make to it? And it's just it's so good and refreshing to finally see that sort of spark happen, because with the way that a lot of the OS manufacturers are, they don't necessarily understand, or they don't know how to parse customer feedback, and they don't know how to fix the problems, because there's so many system integrators now that they don't care. They see their own thing. Like, again, I keep running Microsoft over with a bus, and it's like keep beating a dead horse, or whatever else you want to call it, but Microsoft is the target, and has always been the target since the 90s. Like, don't get me wrong, Apple has done some sketchy shit too, but Microsoft is the main culprit in a lot of these instances. So basically what you do and what you realize is you have to change yourself. You can't just rely on marketing and other random garbage to push you into a hole anymore. You can choose what you want. You know, it's like in back in 20 when was that? Was that 2015 when Apple made that commercial? Um Basically when Apple made the what's a computer ad, and basically it made people think about how they use their computers every day. Like, what do you use your computer for? And a lot of times, and especially more modernly, like Apple advertises their laptop segment and their mobile segment more than anything. Like, you barely ever see a Mac ad specifically. Like, it's either the MacBook, which is our laptop market, or an iPhone or an iPad. Like, you don't see a Mac anymore as an ad. And then obviously their headphones and wearables and other things, but like, you don't really see Mac ads anymore. They're just Apple ads. And it goes to show it's very much a big it is a very big space of where we are now, and it explains a lot. Like, right now I have a laptop that is running OpenSUSE on it, and I have a Samsung phone that is recording this very video, and it's on Android. Like, I don't use very much stationary stuff anymore. Like, I have a Roku device plugged into my TV to make it smart. Like, that's it. Like, I don't really use much else, and it's crazy, but it goes to show that tech is evolving away from stationary stuff, and Microsoft and the like are going to have to just suck it up and just deal with it, you know? And quite honestly, that's kind of my way to end it. Like, you're just going to have to suck it and just deal with it. Like, tech moves on, you know? Like, yeah, there are many PCs out there that are strong enough and more capable enough than anything has ever been before, but like, how long are those going to survive? How long are those going to be able to be supported? You know, it goes without saying that there are a lot of variables that Microsoft and the like have not really thought about, and they refuse to think about it. So, yeah. So, this is the end of the video. So, yeah. I don't know how to end this. So, keep watching. Subscribe. Wherever, whatever. I don't know. I don't care. I'm just putting these on the internet because I'm just doing it to do it, and I like it. I like doing these. So, these little thoughts about kind of rehashing old stuff, I guess. But yeah, so I'll see you all of y'all's in the next video.